Hungry patrons at a local buffet in Alabama took being hungry combined with anger to a new level. A fight broke out, allegedly over crab legs. The unexpected brawl went down at Meteor Buffet in Huntsville, Alabama, as people were waiting to feast on freshly boiled crab legs. Among the restaurant goers was police officer Gerald Johnson, who recalled hearing all the yelling and the tongs, you use those for the crab legs, literally clashing. He said, I sat down, maybe took 2 bites. There was a woman who was beating a man. People were moving around. Plates were being shattered everywhere. He said it's not something you typically hear. And if you can imagine a fencing match, that's what it sounded like as they were using the tongs for weapons. He said, now, why this took place, everybody was saying, she cut me in line. He cut me in line. I was here first. So you see, they've been waiting there for crab legs for a good 10 or 20 minutes. And when they finally came out, it got very heated, especially if someone was taking more than their share. Following the fight, the police arrested 2 guys. One had sustained a cut on his head, and one was uninjured. And both allegedly admitted to letting their tempers cloud their judgment. James 4:1 says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. You do not have because you do not ask God, and when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Now, evidently, the people in the church that James was addressing, they were waging war against each other. And even though James does not give us any information about the nature of the fighting, he lets us know that the conflict was bloody. They were killing one another with angry words. James deals with the root causes of conflict. Now, conflict comes from inner cravings and illicit desires. When one covets what another person has and can't get it, they fight to decide to fight until they can obtain what they want. Conflict happens when people's selfish wants or lusts are not met. People who are pleasure-centered, they'll always be hard to deal with. They will be in a constant conflict with themselves and others. The best way to get what you want is to ask God with the right motive. And God desires to meet our legitimate needs. Ultimately, a person who is pleasure-centered, they'll find themselves in conflict with God. And get this, when you fight against God, you lose every time. Conflict in church should be rare. And while at times there are legitimate reasons for disagreements, I believe you cannot love your brother and decide to murder your brother through major confrontation. Some things are never worth fighting for. The 17th century Jewish philosopher Spinoza, he observed this. He said, I've often wondered that persons who make the boast of professing the Christian religion, namely love and joy and peace and temperance and charity to all men, that they should quarrel with such animosity and display daily animosity toward each other, such bitter hatred, that this, rather than the virtues which they profess, is the readiness criteria of their faith. Gary Preston notes, conflict has a way of growing from a small snowslide into a full-scale avalanche. And on its way downhill, it can sweep victims into its wake. That's why Christian conflict should be uncommon, and getting along through love should be common. Again, the root of conflict remains a selfish spirit that is pleasure-centered rather than the right or wrong of some issue. Understanding this can make it easier to stop conflict before it happens. I love the story of a couple who've been married for 60 years. Throughout their life together, they'd shared everything. They loved each other deeply. They'd not kept any secrets from one another except for a small shoebox that the wife kept in the top shelf of her closet. When they got married, she put the box there and asked her husband never to look inside and never to ask questions about its contents. For 60 years, the man honored his wife's requests. In fact, he'd forgotten about the box until the day his wife grew gravely ill and the doctors said she would not recover. So the man, putting his wife's affairs into order, remembered the box at the top of her closet, got it down, and brought it to the hospital. He asked her if perhaps now they might be able to open it, and she agreed. They opened the box, and inside were 2 crocheted dolls and a roll of money that totaled $95,000. The man was astonished. The woman told her husband that the day before they were married, her grandmother had told her that if she and her husband were to ever get into an argument, any kind of an argument, that they needed to work hard to get it right. And if they were unable to reconcile, that she should simply keep her mouth shut and crochet a doll. The man was touched by this because there were only 2 crocheted dolls in the box. He was amazed that over 60 years of marriage, they apparently had had only 2 conversations that they were unable to reconcile. Tears began to come into his eyes and go down his face, and he grew even more deeply in love with his wife. Then he asked about the money. He says, "What's with this?" His wife said, "Well, every time I crocheted a doll, I sold it to the local craft fair for $5. Now, there was one lady who decided that waging more, it just wasn't worth it. Can you do the same?